Conflict is a natural part of every relationship, whether it's with a partner, a friend, or a coworker. The real problem isn't the argument itself, but how we argue. Too often, we let emotions take over, and the words we choose leave scars that last longer than the fight. But what if you could argue in a way that solves the problem without damaging the relationship? Separating the person from the problem means you shift your perspective in the middle of conflict so that you stop seeing the other person as the issue and start recognizing that the disagreement itself is the issue. When you let yourself confuse the two, everything escalates because now it feels personal. Every word feels like an attack, every tone feels like rejection, and suddenly the relationship feels unsafe. But when you remind yourself that the person across from you is not your enemy, they are someone you care about, or at least someone you want to keep respect with, you create space to actually work through the problem instead of tearing each other down. Too many arguments get stuck because people stop focusing on the issue and start focusing on being right or winning. When you do that, you no longer solve anything. You just trade blows, hoping one will hit harder than the other. And once you go down that road, it doesn't matter if you win the argument because you lose the connection. People remember how you made them feel long after they forget the details of the fight. So the smartest thing you can do is consciously separate the person from the problem and hold on to that perspective, even when emotions are rising. Think about how much changes when you do this. Your tone changes, you speak with less edge in your voice. Your words come out less sharp because you aren't swinging at someone's character. You are working to solve a problem. You don't feel the need to say things you can't take back because your mind isn't set on hurting them. It's set on fixing what's wrong. It also makes listening easier because you are not waiting for their pause so you can strike back. You are listening to understand what they are saying about the issue and not judging their worth as a person. In that moment, separating the person from the problem is really about discipline. It is about choosing not to make everything personal and instead keeping your focus where it belongs on the issue that sparked the conflict. When you don't separate, the two arguments tend to snowball quickly. One small disagreement about chores or schedules can suddenly spiral into accusations about respect or commitment because the problem stopped being about the task and started being about the person's character. That's when the real damage is done, because once you cross into that space, the argument doesn't feel safe anymore. People start building walls in their mind. They start withdrawing trust, and all of that makes repairing the relationship harder later. But if you keep drawing that line in your mind and saying the problem is separate from who they are, you avoid cutting that deep. You leave the door open for resolution because no one feels attacked as a human being. It also creates a sense of teamwork. You position both of you on the same side of the table, looking at the problem together, instead of standing across from each other, pointing fingers. That shift in posture is huge because when two people feel like they're facing the issue as partners, the tone softens, the defense is lower, and the possibility of a solution increases. The argument no longer feels like a battle. It feels like collaboration, even if emotions are involved, because the underlying message is, I value you, but we need to figure this out. That's a very different energy than you are the problem, and you need to change. Another piece of this is practicing restraint when you feel like attacking the person because it feels easier to lash out when emotions boil. But that's where you remind yourself again that the person is not the enemy. They are someone with thoughts, feelings, and experiences you may not fully understand. And if you treat them like the villain, you may win the moment but lose their trust for a long time. Separating the person from the problem means biting your tongue when your mind tries to drag character into the conflict. It means taking a breath when your instinct is to react, and it means remembering that both of you likely want peace but are caught in a moment of friction. This practice doesn't just protect the relationship, it strengthens it over time because every time you argue and prove you can still respect each other despite the heat, you build confidence in the connection. You show that disagreements don't mean disrespect, and that creates safety in the relationship people need. To feel like they can disagree with you without losing you, they need to know conflict doesn't equal character assassination. And when you provide that environment, you actually make the bond stronger. You teach each other that the relationship can hold weight without collapsing. Listening to understand and not to win is one of the most powerful skills you can bring into any argument, because most of the time, people don't actually hear each other. They just wait for their turn to speak. They listen with the goal of preparing their comeback, not with the goal of absorbing what's being said. And when that happens, conversations stop being exchanges and start being competitions. Every word gets treated like a weapon, and every pause is just an opening to strike back. But if you shift the mindset to listening for the sake of understanding, you change the entire atmosphere of the conflict. You're no longer rushing to score points. You're slowing down to connect. And that connection is what keeps the relationship intact. Arguments are not always about who is right. They are often about who feels heard. And when someone feels like their voice actually mattered, even if the outcome doesn't go their way, they walk away less defensive and more respected. Think about what happens when you've been in a fight where the other person clearly wasn't listening to you. You probably felt invisible or dismissed, and that feeling doesn't just frustrate, it cuts deep, because being ignored sends the message that your thoughts or feelings don't matter. On the other hand, when someone listens and reflects back what you're saying, it doesn't mean they agree with you, but it means they cared enough to take you seriously. That act alone can diffuse tension, because people calm down when they feel understood. So listening to understand isn't just about being polite, it's a strategy to actually lower the temperature of the argument. Listening to understand also means asking questions not to trap the other person or prove them wrong, but to get clarity. So instead of jumping in with assumptions, you slow down and say, "Tell me more about what you mean," or "Help me understand what part of this feels the hardest for you." Those questions change the dynamic because they open doors instead of shutting them. They signal that you are invested in more than winning. You are invested in solving. And when the other person senses that they often soften in return, they stop gearing up for battle and start leaning into dialogue, because your energy is no longer combative, it's collaborative. Another key part of listening to understand is controlling your inner dialogue, because while the other person is talking, your brain is already drafting responses and rehearsing arguments. But true listening means quieting that inner courtroom and actually focusing on the words being spoken. That's not easy, because our instinct is to defend ourselves, especially when we feel misunderstood. But that discipline is where the growth happens. When you resist the urge to defend, you give yourself the chance to really grasp the heart of the issue. And sometimes what you hear is not what you expected. Many conflicts are fueled by misunderstandings that could have been cleared up if someone had just paused long enough to truly listen. When you practice listening to understand, you also create safety in the relationship. People realize they can bring their frustrations to you without being crushed in return. That builds trust over time and makes arguments less threatening, because the fear of being dismissed or attacked is removed. Instead, they know they will at least be heard and respected. Even if you disagree, that's a huge gift to give in any relationship, because safety creates room for honesty, and honesty is what keeps connections alive. Without it, people start hiding how they feel, and that silence eventually becomes distance. It's also worth noticing how your body language plays into listening, because if your face or posture communicates impatience or defensiveness, the words don't matter. Your tone and presence will say louder that you don't care. Listening to understand means giving your full attention. It means putting down the phone, making eye contact, leaning into the conversation with curiosity instead of resistance. Even small signals like nodding or repeating back what they said show that you're tracking, and those cues calm the storm because they reassure the other person that you're not tuning out. You're right there with them in the moment. Listening this way doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you stronger, because it takes strength to stay quiet when you want to fire back. It takes strength to value connection over ego, and it takes strength to seek resolution instead of victory. Anyone can argue to win, but not everyone can argue to understand. And when you choose to understand, you're not only solving the problem in front of you, you're investing in the health of the relationship for the long run. Because at the end of the day, most people don't need you to agree with everything they say. They just need to know that when they speak, you'll care enough to hear them fully. Using calm and clear communication instead of emotional reactions is the difference between resolving an argument and creating damage that lingers long after the words are spoken. Because when emotions are driving the conversation, they tend to take control of tone, volume, and choice of words. And once those words leave your mouth, you can't pull them back. Emotional reactions often come out as shouting sarcasm, blame, or harsh accusations. And even if you are right in the core of your point, the way you deliver it overshadows the truth behind it. That's why many arguments end with people remembering how it was said more than what was said. Calm and clear communication gives your message the best chance of being heard without putting the other person on defense. When your voice is steady and your words are measured, the other person can engage with the actual problem instead of being triggered by the delivery. When you choose calm communication, you are not ignoring your feelings. You are simply managing them so they don't manage you. This is not about bottling up emotions or pretending you don't care. It's about expressing them in a way that creates understanding rather than resistance. When you say something like, I feel overwhelmed when things pile up, instead of you never do anything around here, you're communicating the same frustration, but in a way that focuses on the issue instead of attacking the person. Emotional reactions personalize the conflict, and clear communication keeps it about the problem. This small shift changes the course of the argument because one invites collaboration and the other invites defense. Clarity is just as important as calmness because many arguments escalate due to vague statements or passive aggression. People throw out hints or half explanations, expecting the other person to read between the lines, but that only builds confusion and frustration. Clear communication means being direct about what you need or how you feel without loading it with extra drama. Instead of saying, you don't care about me, you might say, I feel unseen when my efforts aren't acknowledged. Clarity takes courage because it requires you to be honest without hiding behind emotional explosions, but honesty packaged with calmness is far easier to receive and respond to. It also helps to slow down the pace of the conversation because emotions speed everything up. Voices get louder, sentences get shorter, and interruptions take over. When you consciously slow down, you give yourself time to filter your words and choose them carefully. Pausing to breathe before responding keeps the argument from spiraling out of control and models self-control for the other person. Often, when one person lowers their intensity, the other unconsciously follows, creating a more productive environment. This doesn't mean the argument won't still have tension, but it will have boundaries that keep it from becoming destructive. Another benefit of calm and clear communication is that it lowers the chance of regret. Emotional reactions often leave you replaying the argument later, wishing you had handled it differently, wishing you hadn't said certain things or crossed certain lines. When you approach it with calmness, you walk away with more peace because even if the disagreement isn't fully resolved, you didn't make it worse through reckless words. You can stand by what you said because it came from a thoughtful place, not a reactive one. That sense of control builds confidence in yourself and in the relationship. This kind of communication also sets the tone for future arguments because the way you fight becomes the pattern both people learn from. If you constantly react emotionally, the other person may avoid bringing issues to you, or they may mirror your reactions and double the chaos. But if you consistently speak calmly and clearly, even when upset, you create an expectation that conflict will be handled respectfully. This makes the relationship feel safer because both people know that disagreements won't automatically turn into shouting matches or personal attacks. It's also important to remember that calmness doesn't mean coldness. You can be calm while still being passionate. You can be clear while still being compassionate. The key is balancing emotion with control, so your message carries both weight and respect. When you show that you can express frustration without losing your balance, you demonstrate emotional maturity, and that earns respect even in disagreement. Clear and calm communication is not about suppressing who you are. It's about choosing the version of yourself that builds bridges instead of walls, choosing the version that argues in a way that protects the relationship while still standing firm on what matters to you. Respecting boundaries and knowing when to pause the argument is one of the most overlooked yet powerful ways to keep a relationship intact during conflict. Because not every disagreement can or should be solved in the heat of the moment. When emotions are high and patience is thin, words can come out sharper than intended, and small issues can quickly grow into battles that neither side planned for. Pushing through an argument at that point often does more harm than good because the focus shifts from resolution to survival. Both people start digging in deeper, defending themselves harder, and the original problem gets buried under layers of anger and hurt. But when you respect boundaries and recognize the need for space, you create a pause that protects both the conversation and the relationship. It's the acknowledgement that stepping back is not giving up. It's giving the discussion the chance to happen with clearer minds and calmer hearts. Many people make the mistake of thinking that walking away or asking for space means weakness or avoidance, but it's actually the opposite. It takes strength to admit that right now is not the right time to continue. It takes maturity to say we both need to cool down before we say things we regret. Because pushing through with no boundaries usually results in explosions. Boundaries are not walls to block connection. They are guardrails to prevent the conversation from going off a cliff. When you know your limit and respect the other person's limit, you are choosing to value the long-term health of the relationship over the short-term satisfaction of winning an argument. Part of respecting boundaries is paying attention not only to your own state, but also to the signals the other person gives. If you notice their body language closing off, if they stop listening or raise their voice or shut down entirely, it's a sign the conversation has reached overload. Continuing to push in that moment doesn't bring understanding. It only drives more distance. That's where you step back and say, let's pause and come back to this later. It's not about ignoring the problem. It's about protecting the space where the problem can actually be solved. It is showing that you care more about handling each other with respect than pushing for immediate closure. Boundaries also apply to the way arguments are carried out. Agreeing on what is off limits can prevent deep wounds that don't heal. Some people decide no shouting, no name calling, no bringing up the past, no storming out without saying a word. When both people agree on these boundaries, the argument has structure. It may still get heated, but it won't cross into territory that damages trust over time because every relationship needs safety, and without boundaries, arguments quickly erode that safety until people start fearing the next conflict instead of facing it together. Knowing when to pause also builds emotional intelligence because it trains you to check in with yourself instead of blindly following the impulse to keep going. When your chest is tight, your voice is rising, or your thoughts are racing, those are signals that clarity is slipping, and without clarity, the words that follow will not be productive in those moments. Pausing allows you to breathe, collect yourself, and return with more control. It gives you the chance to think about what you actually want out of the conversation rather than just reacting to what was said moments earlier. Pausing can also be powerful for the other person. Sometimes giving space shows them that you value their feelings enough not to force them into continuing when they are not ready. It communicates respect and patience, which softens defensiveness because no one likes to feel cornered or pressured into immediate answers. Allowing the pause is an act of trust that the conversation will continue, but under healthier conditions, it creates an environment where resolution feels possible rather than forced. Respecting boundaries and pausing arguments also sends the message that the relationship matters more than the issue at hand. It tells the other person that even though you disagree, they are still worthy of patience and care. That message stays long after the argument ends, and it creates a pattern where both people know it's safe to step back without fearing abandonment or rejection. That sense of safety is critical because it allows both people to engage in conflict without the constant fear of permanent damage. Boundaries and pauses don't erase arguments, they guide them so that when they do happen, they leave the relationship stronger, not weaker. Focusing on resolution and not domination is what separates healthy arguments from destructive ones, because when the goal becomes winning, you automatically create a loser. And in relationships, losers don't forget when someone walks away from an argument feeling defeated, dismissed, or crushed. they carry that with them into the next interaction and the one after that. And over time, those small defeats stack into resentment arguments. Stop being about solving problems and start being about survival. One person fights to be heard while the other fights to stay in control, and the actual issue gets buried under layers of ego. But when the focus shifts to resolution, the dynamic changes, because now it's not about who's right, it's about what works. Both people are on the same side of the table, tackling the problem together, and the energy becomes cooperative instead of combative. Resolution requires asking yourself in the middle of conflict, what outcome do I actually want? Do I want to win this round, or do I want peace and progress in the relationship? That simple check can redirect your words and actions, because most of the time you don't actually need to dominate to feel validated. You just need to know that your concerns were taken seriously. And the same is true for the other person when resolution is the goal. Both voices are given room and solutions become possible. That might mean compromise. It might mean agreeing to disagree. It might mean taking turns with decisions. But the point is movement forward, not standing still in a power struggle. Domination thrives on volume, on cutting off the other person, on clever comebacks, and on pointing out flaws. Resolution thrives on patience, empathy, and collaboration. One destroys trust while the other builds it. And trust is the foundation of any relationship. Without trust, no amount of winning will matter because the relationship itself will feel unsafe. People don't want to argue with someone who turns every disagreement into a contest because contests have scoreboards and no one wants to live in a home or friendship where they are constantly being scored against. Resolution says, let's find a way through this so we both feel respected. Domination says, I'm going to make sure, I'm above you. Another part of focusing on resolution is recognizing when pride is speaking louder than reason. Pride says, don't back down, don't admit fault, don't let them think they got you. Pride makes it about image rather than connection, and it tricks you into thinking that yielding in any way means weakness. But real strength is found in humility, and humility is often what clears the path for resolution, because it allows space for phrases like, I see your point, or I didn't realize that mattered so much to you. Those statements don't weaken your stance. They strengthen the bond because they show the other person you care about understanding as much as being understood. Resolution also means keeping perspective. Remembering that arguments are moments, not definitions. Just because you are in conflict doesn't mean the relationship is broken. It just means something needs attention. And if you focus on solving that something, the relationship grows. But if you focus on proving superiority, the relationship erodes. People, remember whether you were fair or dismissive, whether you sought peace or dominance, whether you leaned into empathy or into ego. Every choice you make during conflict leaves an impression that shapes how safe the other person feels with you in the future. Sometimes resolution doesn't look like a perfect agreement. Sometimes it's simply finding a middle ground where both people feel heard enough to move forward. It's recognizing that not every detail will align, but the respect between you will remain intact. It's the willingness to let go of the need to win every point in order to preserve the bigger picture of connection, because in the long run, resolution strengthens the foundation while domination cracks it. When you argue for resolution, you show that the relationship is more important than the scoreboard, and that shift changes everything because it allows both people to leave the argument with dignity intact, and dignity is what keeps people willing to come back to the table again and again without fear of being torn down.